Hello again. So we can now perform encryption and authentication using either public key techniques or symmetric key techniques, right? However, we have not addressed how parties actually obtain the public key of an entity, or how do they obtain a shared symmetric key. So in this video, we will discuss one of the primary applications of digital signatures, and this is the secure distribution of public keys. So in the previous videos, basically we have seen how they use public key cryptography once public keys are securely distributed. So now we show how public key cryptography itself can be used to securely distribute the public keys, right? This may sound a bit circular, but it's not. So what we will show is that once a single public key belonging to a trusted party is distributed in a secure manner, that key can be used to, let's say, bootstrap the secure distribution of arbitrarily many other public keys. Hence, at least in principle, the problem of secure key distribution need only to be solved once. Good. So what is a PKI? PKI stands for public key infrastructure, and basically with private key crypto, with symmetric crypto, the main problems were how to manage all the keys that we have exchanged and how can we distribute keys, right? How we can distribute keys and how we can establish keys, as keys needs to be distributed via secure channels. Now in public key systems, we replace these problems with those of key authentication, which means like which key belongs to whom, as keys needs to be distributed by authentic channels. Now, the system which provides authentic public keys to application is called public key infrastructure, or PKI. So few words about the randomness of public keys. So a public key generation algorithm contains, let's say, the following step. We put this in a very high level format, right? So basically we first, let's say, generate the private key, then we give the private key as input to some sort of a one-way function denoted by f here, and the output of this operation will basically be the public key, right? So we generate our private key, we give it as input to some sort of one-way function that maps from the private key space to the public key space, and this gives us the corresponding public key. Now, it becomes necessary that the principal's public key becomes associated with the principal's identity in a verifiable and trustworthy way. Okay, so to send an encrypted message, we must be sure about the authenticity of the public key, and same with verifying a signature, right? So we don't want to, if we wish, for example, to send an encrypted message to Bob, we will be using Bob's public key. Nevertheless, it's important to be sure that we are using the correct public key, right? Good, so let's see another example why it's important to verify a public key before we actually start using it. So again, we have Alice and Bob. So let's say that both they have generated their public and private key pairs, right? And then let's say that Alice wishes to share a secret with Bob. So basically she communicates, she contacts Bob and she says, okay, hi Bob, I would like to share a secret with you. Can you please send me your public key? Right, upon reception of that message, Bob basically, he replies back to Alice by saying, hi Alice, here is my public key, PK of Bob, right? Now, upon reception, what would Alice do? Simple, basically, she uses an encryption algorithm, which she gives as input the message M, the secret that she wishes to share with Bob, as well as the public key that received earlier in the previous step. So this will result in an encrypted version of M that will be sent to Bob. So all good till now. So let's assume now that we also have our malicious adversary in the middle, Eve, that she's overhearing the communication between Alice and Bob. What she can do is that, first of all, she can see Bob's public key, but that's not really a problem, right? I mean, Bob's public key is public information, so it's not a problem that Eve has access to that. However, she knows that the second message that is exchanged in this, let's say, protocol is where Bob is sending his public key to Alice. So what would Eve can do is that basically she can drop that message and, or anyway, replace it with her public key, right? So what she does is that she takes PK of Bob throw it away, and in its position, she puts PK of Eve, so Eve's public key. Now, poor Alice, that she doesn't have any mechanism to verify that, the public key that received it's not exactly Bob's public key. What she will do is that she will end up encrypting her secret, her message M, with Eve's public key. And then she will just send this to Bob, which means that basically Eve, that she has access to her secret key, she gets that message, she can decrypt it, and therefore she can get access to the secret that Alice wishes to share with Bob. In other words, basically by doing this, there's no privacy, right? Alice, she thinks that she's communicating with Bob, and she is communicating with Bob, but without using his public key, right? So she thinks that she's encrypting information in some way that only Bob can decrypt, but this is not true. And the problem here is that Alice didn't have any kind of mechanisms in her toolbox that would allow her to verify the key that she received before start using it. Good. So let's talk a bit about CA. So CA stands for Certification Authority. So a trusted server, which is used to perform the management of public keys, is called a CA, a Certification Authority. So the first thing that you need to keep in mind is that CA is a trusted server, okay, a trusted entity, something like the TTP we mentioned in the previous step, but not exactly a TTP. Now, a CA is a special principal who is well known and trusted directly by the principals in the domain it serves, and for each user within its domain, the certification authority issues public key certificate certifying the user's key material, right? So the job of a CA is basically to issue public key certificates to users through which other users, other principals in the community can verify their validity. Now, imagine that how we get a certificate. Let's put it very simple, basically that we have Alice, a user. Basically, she can communicate a CA, say I would like to have a certificate, and then the certification authority would basically generate a certificate for Alice, which will be sent to Alice. Now, in reality, there are commercial certificate authorities that they exist and will produce a digital certificate for any user on its public key, often after payment of a fee and some checks on whether you are who you say you are. Now, the trust required by a CA is much weaker as opposed to the trust needed to be placed to a server for secret key-based protocols, something like the TTP that we mentioned in the previous video. Now, the security service provided is basically message authentication, which can be performed without need of handling any secret. So the important thing to remember here is that the CA doesn't have access to any of your secrets. In other words, she doesn't have access to Alice's secret key, right? So she generates a certificate through which any user can verify Alice's public key, but the CA doesn't have access to Alice's secret key or to any other user's secret keys. Good. Now, the service can also be provided offline, right? You don't need to be online to generate a certificate. You can do it also from your command prompt line in your machine. Okay, some more things about certificates. So digital certificates are used for security and identification. A certificate basically is a file or an electronic document that contains a bunch of data fields, and they are using a trust model in order for the end user to know where the certificate has come from and whether it is genuine or not. Now, let's compare digital certificates with physical certificates. So they have a lot of common things. So in both physical and digital certificates, basically you can see who has issued the certificate. For example, when you get your diploma from a university, okay, it has the name of the university, right? So immediately you see the certificate and you understand that, okay, that guy graduated from Harvard or whatever. So you know who issued the certificate. Then you know who the certificate is issued to. So once you see the diploma of someone, you can see his name there. So you know that, okay, Harvard issued the certificate for Antonis, for example, right? Then you can see an expiration date if there is one. For example, in digital certificates, we always have an expiration date. In the physical world, we have expiration dates in certificates such as the driving license, for example. And then we have the digital signature, which is like the wax seal on the physical certificate, and proves that the certificate came from a trusted source and is not fake. So the stamp on the physical certificate is replaced by the digital signature on the digital certificate, right? So you can see that basically we are talking about the same concept, with the only difference that we are moving what we had all these years in the physical world to the digital world, right? Good. So let's see how we can verify the validity of a certificate. Again, this is an example in a very high level, so it's not exactly how it's going on, but how it works, but you'll get the main idea. So again, we have the certification authority, CA, and the verifier, Bob. So first of all, the CA generates a certificate, let's call it cert for now, and then she calculates the hash of the certificate. Then what CA will do is that she will use her secret key, SK of CA, to sign the hash of the certificate that she calculated in the second step of this process. And she will contact the verifier by sending the signed version of the hash of the certificate as well as the certificate itself. Upon reception, the verifier, first of all, gets the certificate, calculates the hash of the certificate, then uses the CA's public key PK of CA to verify this, to decrypt basically the first part of the message, and then verifies that the two hashes are equal. So if the two hashes are equal, then it means that the message was received properly and the certificate is valid. In other words, what the verifier just did here is that he just verified the signature on the certificate, right? And that's what we do usually with certificates. So we get the certificates and we verify its validity by checking the signature on the certificate and all of the rest of the data contained in it. Good. So certificate, they have a trust model. So how it works? So let's say that we have VeriSign, a certification authority, and Bob is contacting VeriSign to say, I wish to obtain a certificate for my website, webservicebob.com, right? As I said earlier, there are commercial certification authorities that exist and they can produce a digital certificate for your public key after you pay a fee, and after the CA does a number of checks to basically verify that you are who you are claimed to be. Now, usually these checks, they help also to prevent individuals from pursuing certificates for illegal activities. For example, imagine if I would ask to get a certificate for a website Microsoft.com, but instead of I had replaced I's with ones, then the certification authority would not give me such a certificate because it was obvious that I'm going to use this certificate to, fool some of users, right? Or anyway, to do some kind of spamming or illegal activities. Good. Now, after all these checks are done, then basically the CA replies back to Bob by sending him the certificate for his service, bob.com. Now, imagine that we have Alice, a typical user who wishes to use Bob's service. So every time that Alice contacts Bob, basically Bob replies to Alice by sending his certificate. Upon reception, Alice immediately verifies the validity of the certificate. Basically, her browser is doing this in the background. And if the verification is successful, then she moves on and she uses Bob's service. If the verification does not work, is not successful, basically Alice will see an alert on her browser, and then she will have to drop the connection, right? Good. So for example, imagine that when you go on Amazon and you try to buy something, at the checkout process, if the certificate is not valid, so if there is some kind of attack, and the certificate is not valid, then you will see a sign that something is going wrong, and it's better if you just drop the connection, and then you need to move back and just use another computer or another browser, or just, anyway, don't do the purchase. Now, the question here is, how does Alice knows that this is a trusted certificate? Basically, nowadays, operating systems and the computers, basically the commodity laptops that you buy, they come with a bunch of pre-installed certificates and signatures in the operating systems. So that's how Alice can know that this Bob certificate is a valid one. Now, what is cross certification? So it is common that for more than one CA to exist. Now, a quick examination of the properties of your browser basically will reveal a large number of certification authorities which your browser assumes you trust to perform the function of a CA. Now, as there is more than one CA, it is common for one CA to sign a digital certificate containing the public key of another certificate, right? So one CA signs a digital certificate containing the public key of another certificate, right? And vice versa. Now, a process which is known as cross certification. So we have a certification authority, and then we generate another certification authority. Basically, the first certification authority can sign the public key of the second one, okay? And this is like called cross certification. Now, cross certification is needed if more than one CAs exist, obviously, and since a user may not have a trusted copy of the CA's public key needed to verify another user's digital signature, this is solved by cross certificates, which means that one CA's public key is signed by another CA. Now, the user first verifies the appropriate cross certificate and then verifies the user certificate itself. With many CAs, one can get quite long certificate chains like the one you see on your screen. So suppose Bob trusts the root CA's public key and he obtains Alice's public key, which is signed by the private key of CA3. Now, he then obtains CA3's public key, either along with Alice's digital certificate or by some other means. Now, CA3's public key comes in a certificate which is signed by the private key of CA1. Bob then needs to obtain the public key of CA1, which will be contained in a certificate signed by the root CA. Hence, by verifying all the signatures, he ends up trusting Alice's public key. So, yeah, Bob trusts CA2 and trusts root CA, and therefore he can trust CA1 and CA3 that he issued the certificate to Alice. Good, so some highlights. So, in general, a digital certificate is not just a signature on the single pair Alice's public key. So one can place all sorts of other possibly application-specific information into a certificate. For example, it is usual for the certificate to contain like information such as users' names, user's public key, name of the CA, the serial number of the certificate, the expiration date, as well as if this is an encryption or a signing key. Okay, this is not true for RSA keys, of course, because as we said, they are the same. Now, often the function of a CA is split into two parts. One part deals with verifying the user's identity, while the other one actually signs the public keys. Now, the signing is performed by the CA, while the identity of the user is parceled out to what we call a registration authority, or known as RA. So this can be a good practice with the CA implemented in a more secure environment to protect the long-term private key. Apart from that, anyone with the CA's public key can verify the user's public key and so obtain a trusted copy of the user's public key. Now, the other thing is that certificates can be stored in repositories and retrieved as needed, and since they are digitally signed, there is no need to be secure. keep this in your mind that, okay, certificates do not reveal anything about the private key of the owner. And if you look on a certificate, you can see all this data, for example, the user's name, the user's public key, the name of the CA, the serial number, and so on. However, if you try to change any of this information, the verification process will fail, because imagine that the signature on the certificate um, contains a concatenation, the hash of the concatenation of all these fields. So the CA that signs a certificate takes all these fields that we have stored in the certificate, calculates the hash of the concatenation of these fields, and then uses its secret key to generate the signature on the certificate. As a result, if a malicious adversary tries to change any of these fields, the verification will fail, right? Good. So CA hierarchies. So imagine that we have basically in large organizations, it may be appropriate to delegate the responsibility for issuing certificates to several certification authorities, right? So imagine that we have a root CA. The root CA is at the top of the hierarchy, and the root CA's certificate is self-signed. So when we generate a root CA, we need to generate a certificate which will be self-signed, right? Good. Then the CAs that are directly subordinate to the root CA, they have certificates signed by the root CA, right? Now imagine that in a large organization, the root CA is generated in the beginning, and then we generate one single CA for each of the brands that the company has. One in Asia, one in Europe, one in the States, and one in Africa, right? Then each of these brands, they have their own sub CAs. For example, in Europe, we have the sales CA, the marketing CA, and the engineering CA. And then if a new employee, for example, starts working as an engineer in the Europe brand, then basically the engineering CA that is subordinate of the Europe CA, which is subordinate to the root CA, will generate a certificate for that user, right? So in large organization, it may be appropriate to delegate the responsibility for issuing certificates to several different certification authorities. For example, the number of certificates required may be too large for a single CA to maintain. Different organization units may have different policy requirements, or it may be important for a CA to be physically located in the same geographic area as the people to whom it is issuing certificates. Hence, it is common for more than CAs to exist. So you can see that even if you just look at your computer certification authorities. Good. So let's think about the world without a CA first of all. Okay. So let's assume that we don't have CAs. So to see the advantage of certificates and CAs, consider the world without a CA. So what you need to do is that you need to obtain many individual public keys from each individual in some secure fashion. So imagine that if you want to communicate with me securely, you need to somehow get my public key, right? And then if you want to communicate with Jane, you need to get Jane's public key. Then if you want to get an update from Microsoft, you need to get Microsoft's public key, and so on and so forth. So each key needs to be obtained in a secure manner, as does every new key you obtain, right? So we explained earlier why it's important to be able to verify the public keys that we receive, right? So we need to have a protocol that will allow us to get everything in a secure manner. Now, let's see the world with a CA. So first, what you do is that you obtain a single public key securely, namely the CA's public key. So if there is a CA, okay, in the beginning, what you need to do is that you need to obtain securely the public key of the CA. Then you obtain many individual public keys which are just signed by the CA, right? So you obtain all these keys from each individual in some secure fashion. So let's say that Trent is basically our CA, the name for our CA. So first, you get Trent's totally trustworthy public key. And then every time that you want to get a key for an individual, you will do this, let's say through Trent. it's not exactly true, but anyway, trend will have assign those keys. So basically, it's like trend saying to you, okay, this is Antonis public key, this is Jane's public key, and this is Microsoft's update key. So what's happening is that you trust trend, and if you trust trend's key and you trust to do his job correctly, then you trust all of them, right? So basically, you need to get a first key in a secure manner, and then everything is much easier because everything will be signed by trend, and then you can immediately trust the keys that you receive. Good. So the main problem with SCA arises when a user's public key is compromised or becomes, for some reason, untrusted. Now, for example, a third party has gained knowledge of the private key, or an employee leaves the company. So as the public key is no longer to be trusted, all the associated digital certificates are now invalid and need to be revoked. But these certificates can be distributed over a large number of users, so each one of which needs to be told to no longer trust that certificate, right? So the CA must somehow inform all users that the certificates containing that specific public key is no longer valid, and this process basically is called certificate revocation, right? So you revocate the certificate of a user, you need to inform everyone in the community that, guys, that key is no longer valid, right? So no one should use it anymore. Good. So certificates revocation lists, also known as CRLs. So one way to accomplish this, the revocation basically, is by the use of a certificate revocation list, or CRL, which is a signed statement by the CA containing the serial numbers of all certificates which have been revoked by the CA and whose validity period has not expired. Now, one clearly need not include in this the serial numbers of certificates which have passed their expiry date. Users must then ensure they have the latest CRL. This can be achieved by assuming CRLs at regular intervals, even if the list has not changed. Now, such a system can work well in a corporate environment when, let's say, the overnight background jobs are often used to make sure each desktop computer in the company is up to date with the latest software, etc., etc. For other situations, it is hard to see how the CRLs can be distributed, especially if there are a large number of CAs trusted by each user. So as a conclusion, keep in mind that you always need to have CRLs, and you need basically to distribute CRLs in regular intervals, even if there is no change to any of the lists, right? Good. So as a conclusion, I would say that keep in mind that the whole system of certification authorities and certificates, which is, as we said earlier, is often called PKI, public infrastructure, allows a distribution of trust, right? So the need to trust the authenticity of each individual public key in your possession is replaced by the need to trust a body, which is the certification authority, and you trust that a CA will do its job correctly. And with this, basically, we conclude lecture 3. In lectures 4 and 5, we will start seeing some protocols, and we will also start seeing many attacking behaviors, and we'll start think like attackers. Thanks a lot. See you soon.